On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we're taking a step back to get a tutorial on NFV and SDN technology.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Welcome to this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us this week. Well, we've done now about 36 of these shows, and most of the topics of conversation have been geared towards those individuals in the telecom space who might already know a bit about what NFV and SDN are. Well, at the recent CTA Super Mobility event in Las Vegas, I spoke with a few people who had asked if maybe we took a step back and provided a bit of a tutorial or introductory conversation on the topic of NFV and SDN. Luckily, I had a conversation scheduled with Ericsson at the event, and we were lucky enough to speak with Mark Murphy, who's the innovation lead at Ericsson, to provide a bit of background on what NFV and SDN are and how they relate to the telecom space. Let's take a look at that video interview now. What's Ericsson's basic explanation of what virtualization is? So as you look at what would you tell somebody who's doing that?
So virtualization is taking a computer, like an operating system, and running it on another operating system. So imagine a laptop that you're typing on right here, and you want to put another computer, like running, you have a Mac, and you want to put a Windows, or you want to put a Linux, so you can run an OS on top of an OS. So the idea of virtualization is that you have this cluster or a grouping of hardware that you put a hypervisor or some kind of controlling mechanism on the bottom, and then you run these virtualized operating systems on top of that.
Okay.
Right?
No, I guess as you look at the different acronyms that come along with SDN, NFV, how do those play into the mix? What does SDN do? What does NFV do?
Right.
VNS and all those kind of things. How
The three-letter acronym soup. Right.
So play in the picture.
Right. So we've taken. So when you talk about virtualization, for the most part, you're talking about the application layer.
Okay.
Web servers, mail servers, etc. But when you start talking NFV and SDN, now you've gone lower down. Now we're virtualizing the network components, like the routers and the gateways that you see. I'm taking that hardware and I'm taking the software off of it, and I'm virtualizing it and putting it on the network. So network function virtualized is that function that's we just virtualized that piece of hardware. And SDN is the controller. That's the software-defined networking piece that I can manage all of these NFVs. So that allows me to tell computer A to spin up a new VM, a new operating system, to tell it to behave a certain way, and to control other, routing and other traffic.
What are the benefits for, say, the mobile operators who want to go down this route? I mean, what's the general benefit that they're going to see if they do happen?
There's the benefit are I'd say two or threefold.
Okay.
But the simple one is operational efficiency, and it also gives you network slicing. And when I say network slicing, I use that term to define, I want to carve up my network in a way that I can have certain characteristics of the network for certain devices. So if I want to have a light switch and I flip that light switch and it's a connected environment, I want the light to come on. So I need to have that NFV, that virtualized node, close, regionally wise, to where that equipment is, as opposed to somewhere in Siberia or somewhere far away that I flip the switch and have to wait a few seconds. So having an SDN tell the network to bring that up close to that proximity of that light switch so that it behaves faster, as opposed to you and me surfing Facebook or Twitter, etc.
So it's more of an efficiency gain, or they'll be able to spin up functions quicker? Or
It's functions quicker, and it allows them to program the network side. So today we can program the application like the internet, like HTML, so I can program web pages and stuff to communicate, but we need to move down. So we've gone to virtualized operating systems, and then you go into containers, and now we need to move further down the stack even more so that the networking has that same programmability, agility, and accessibility that we have on the internet side. We need to have that same control on the networking side.
Got it, okay. And for a company like Ericsson, obviously you guys are a pretty well-established company. People like heard about you. What does this move towards virtualization do for Ericsson? Obviously, probably a new business model for you guys. I mean, how does Ericsson kind of view this move towards virtualization? How does it change you guys?
Yeah, it's an interesting migration, because everyone sees the cost benefits immediately because of the scale and the efficiency, and now I can spin up networks in a very quick and efficient manner. However, if I'm going to start taking best of breed for different NFV components, and I'm going to put those all together, the amount of time that I have to integrate all those starts going up, because I have to make sure that this NFV can talk to this other NFV in an efficient way. So you're making life simpler, but you're also making it a little bit more complicated. So, and it's kind of like the pets versus cattle model.
Sure.
Right? So you're no longer managing pets like, you have at home. Now I'm managing herds or giant, flocks of things that I need to control. So you need to have that kind of manageability in place.
So it seems like automation is a big part of being able to manage it, because like you said, it seems like it's more complicated.
That's right.
It just seems like, why would you want to make it more complicated? But then if you, I guess, tap into more advances in automation, then you can control.
So that's the SDN part.
Okay.
So the NFV just virtualizes.
Okay.
So we just virtualize the portfolio more or less.
The NFV is like the cattle being thrown
That's
out.
your cattle, right? But you now need digital industrialization. How do you industrialize all these digital assets in a flow, flow and a life cycle, so that you can control those assets? So that industrialization is one of the key areas that SDN helps address.
And that's now the OpenFlow is is that part of this? That's part of the SDN.
OpenFlow is part of SDN, yes.
Okay, and that's just kind of what's used as kind of a.
SDN is just a generic term, and you don't have to use OpenFlow,
Okay.
but OpenFlow is predominantly the way that SDN is being delivered today.
And it seems like we're still pretty early in the whole cycle of virtualization. I'm not saying you guys are going to work on it, some carriers are moving pretty aggressively, but it's still pretty early phases, it seems, still early days of just moving
the
virtualization.
The virtualization stuff's moving pretty quick,
Yeah.
and deploying and trials and testing and everything, so that's actually working quite well. The SDN stuff, because it's much more sensitive, people are, operators, and I don't blame them. I mean, you're basically relinquishing control of your network to this orchestration environment. So that's a little bit of a leap of faith.
Yeah, that's I'm guessing but an opportunity for you guys, because you guys can at least use your own experience. I'm sure they're very comfortable working with you too, with Ericsson. So obviously, if you say, hey, we can make this work, don't worry, you can kind of reassure them.
Sure.
That's part of the situation, kind of make it an easier transition.
Yeah, we do prime integration for all kinds of services and applications. So whether or not you pick part of us or others, it doesn't really matter. We can package that whole solution together and bring it to market.
And that's like a big key of this too, is also just the inner workings between. I mean, at the end of the day, all stuff has to work together at some point too.
Right.
So it does seem like it's kind of opened up a lot of interoperability issues, and things have to be, everybody has to kind of be on the same page when it comes to this move towards virtualization. You can't just be one person working in the silos somewhere.
Correct.
Everybody's got to be working together, so I'm sure lots of opportunities.
Right, absolutely. I mean, that standardization is still being discussed. That's why I was saying earlier, that integration part.
Yeah.
That effort goes up exponentially the more you segregate or decouple all these VMs and all these DNFs. You need to make sure they all talk properly.
Yeah, that's key. So, okay, all right. I think that's a pretty good overview, just kind of getting the basics of it. I think that's kind of what people are hoping to get. So, I don't know how much more deeper want to dig into the topics. I guess, I've seen a lot of progress when it comes to kind of this move towards the standardization is a big part of this. I know there's Etsy's working on things, there's all these different trade groups. How's that is that progressing, do you think, at a pretty good pace, or what's the
it's
the challenges there?
You have the 3GPP standard,
Yes.
right? So taking a physical box and virtualizing it doesn't negate or doesn't change the 3GPP standard.
Okay.
So the way that devices talk to each other is still the same.
Okay.
The part that I talk about is where you start adding additional functionality and features. You want APIs. So this NFV now has an API layer that I want another NFV to talk to control or have it communicate policies or whatnot. So that's where you have to make sure that the protocol used, that this, the header, et cetera, is making sure that that all jives.
Is that progress being made on that front? Because it does seem like, I've talked to some other vendors, and that's still kind of an issue trying to get.
Yeah, but that's up to, a lot of times that's up to the supplier.
Okay.
Right? Because I don't know of any definition that says this VM needs to talk to this other VM this way. So that's where the integration part comes in. So it requires more integration work for NFVs to talk to each other. You yeah, just basically IP is kind of the only real standard that you have.
Yeah, that definitely makes it a bit of a challenge. I'm sure, but long hours trying to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it is a challenge to address all the nuances of how different NFVs behave in certain ways.
I guess as you look kind of to the continued progression of this, I mean, is there one challenge that kind of sticks out to you that perhaps needs to be tackled in the short term, or something that kind of you see as being a bit of a hurdle, or is it just kind of a bunch of small little hurdles that could kind of add up to something bigger? I mean, what kind of keeps you concerned or most up at night? I guess hopefully nothing work related. Nothing work related.
I mean, the SDN is probably the least mature of all of them, because there's so many pieces and so many people, people in relative like companies and infrastructure that need to be addressed and qualified and integrated.
Yeah.
That's the one that's probably going to take the most amount of time to get ratified or get standardized.
That's interesting.
Right?
When I first started covering this, SDN seemed like it was kind of out in front in terms of development as opposed to NFV. It seems like the past 6-12 months, it's almost swapped where NFV really got a lot of momentum. Now it seems like it's a little more established, at least protocol-wise.
And it's a little bit easier, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to take what you know
Sure.
and you have it and you optimize it for a virtual environment, whether it's one type of hypervisor versus another. You have the control. Whereas now when you talk of SDN, you have the layer above that needs to talk to these all below. So that's where it gets a little bit interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mark also provided a little bit of an update on where Ericsson was in terms of its own moves towards virtualization and any challenges it sees in the marketplace today.
Trail, basically.
Yeah. Where it gets really interesting though is when you start. So now we've talked about the networking side, and we start talking about the hardware side from the data center standpoint. So like our HDS 8000 portfolio, to where we use rack scale architecture to decouple the hardware now. So now I don't have servers, I have CPUs, and I have storage, so that's where you really start to see the change, even going down the stack further.
Yeah. Is there a challenge, or I guess in making sure that everything's that carrier grade requirement that all operators have to have? I mean, obviously AT&T, they've got a long history in the wireline side. People know how the name has a certain reliability aspect to it that people expect. And obviously with virtualization, a lot of this is coming from the internet world or the data center world, where perhaps you don't need 5 nines quite so much.
Right.
But is there kind of a challenge to kind of bridge that gap between that new technology world and make sure
the nines?
The 9 value, exactly.
Yeah, it is. But that's something that we've addressed. So with our OpenStack platform, we have this execution environment that we have that sits on top of OpenStack that manages all this high availability and the nines, if you will, for all the telco grade NFVs. So that's how we've overcome some of the shortcomings that just native vanilla, OpenStack type environments deliver.
Yeah. I'm guessing, I have to imagine, again, there are a lot of new vendors in this space now, but it seems like you guys have been established so long now. I'm guessing the operators are very comfortable with the fact that you guys do know you kind of are very familiar with what they need, and you're kind of bringing this along as well. And I'm guessing they're going to assume that you guys are going to make sure that what you're bringing is up to what they need as well. So I'm
sure.
A familiarity that's got to be good for everybody involved in it too. So
absolutely. I mean, that's all part of the validation process whenever we turn this stuff up.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, cool.
Well, some great insight from Mark on the topic of NFV and SDN, and obviously it's always great to kind of take a step back and get an overall view of the marketplace for perhaps those who don't know as much about the market as others might. So again, thanks again to Mark and Ericsson for some insight there. And we plan to also include this video in a lot of our future shows for those who perhaps might need a little bit of a refresher course as well on the topic. Well, again, thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, and make sure to check us out again next week.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.